Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. I did a live stream earlier today, but I had to take it down right after because I realized at some point during the live stream, the portrait window that you see in the bottom left, it lost connection, and for some inexplicable reason, it started showing my computer's IP address. So I did not want to live stream that information, obviously. So I found, and it's just too bad because it was a great live stream. There were some viewers. I had already gotten some feedback during it, but next time I will schedule the live stream so you guys can actually know what time I'm going to be on. Although I did announce it. Wait, did I announce it? I don't think I did. I think I was pretty vague about it. I think I said I was just going to do one at the end of the week. So I did this article that we're about to go over now. It comes from Haaretz, and I think you guys, I've done a few articles from there. It's a publication based out of Israel. And as you know, I've talked about it ad nauseum here. There's a lot of excavations that go on in Israel. They find stuff all the time. In Jordan, Middle East, just that entire region is rich, full of things. And if you type in Google find a dig, it's not findadig.com, but it gives you an exhaustive list of all the scheduled digs that they're gonna do from various universities, mainly from the United States. And they have a schedule of when the digs are, and you can apply to be a volunteer to do these digs. So it's about lodging. I just took a glance at it. It was about $550 for a week of lodging, and you're allowed to stay 2 weeks as a volunteer. So you just pay your own airfare, and then it's probably about $4 to $5 grand total if you want to do it. I'd recommend doing it if you're into this. I mean, it's a great opportunity. You don't get paid, but you have great experience. And if I had the time, I would definitely do it, and if I had the money, I would definitely do it. But I have neither of those. But if you guys do, that's a great opportunity to get at the cutting edge. Archaeology is an interesting field because it's one of those fields where they're always looking for volunteers, and you can get on the cutting edge and speak to everybody from the lowest level grad students working for college credit all the way up to the top, the directors of the excavation. And you can ask them questions and get some feedback and all that stuff. So anyway, this site that we're talking about, it's called Tel Khasan, and it's a hill rising 28 meters from the coastal plain near the city of Acre here. So Tel Khasan is at the top left here. This is the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, so this is not contemporaneous with what I'm going to talk about, but this site right here in the northeast of Israel next to Galilee is a very strategic and elevated site that has been conquered by various people. So there's the Philistines, the Canaanites, the Phoenicians, Israelites, of course, the Persians and the Egyptians and the Greeks. They've all passed through there and occupied that zone at one point or another. And that's because it's so valuable militarily because it's next to the ocean. All the major trade routes are right next to it. It's a very strategic point, especially if you're using it as a staging area to invade a neighboring country, which is what happened in this article that I'm about to go over. And this is what the site looks like today. It just looks like farmland now, but there was a lot going on back then. The article reads from Haaretz. It says, archaeologists may have found a 2,500-year-old Persian military base in northern Israel. The Persian camp on the Acre Plain seems to have been a base camp for King Cambyses' all-out attack on Egypt in the 520s BC. Yeah, so if you guys don't know about the Achaemenid Empire, just in a nutshell, it was founded by Cyrus the Great in the 580s, who was the father of Cambyses. At that time, there was the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Lydian Empire, the Median Empire. They were all going at it, and he overcame all those empires and absorbed them. And here's a map of this. So Cyrus II is the son of Cyrus the Great. And then Cambyses is the grandson. I must have misspoke earlier. Cambyses is not the son. He's the grandson. So under Cyrus II, this is what the Achaemenid Empire was, the extent of it. And then Cambyses, his contribution was this blue spot here, which was Egypt. Now, he used the staging area of Acre, this place next to Acre, Tel Kassan, as one of a few staging areas for transferring his huge army and just raining down hell on Egypt. And he succeeded. He became the first non-Egyptian king of Egypt because of this, to rule Egypt for a little while. So the reason why they knew these ruins dated to the Persian period was because of these ceramic jars and cooking pots they found, which were in the styles of Phoenician and Greek. And that's very interesting because there are several accounts of major historians like Strabo, Herodotus. They talk about how the Greeks during this time they were in such a bad spot that they were serving as mercenaries for the Persian Empire. They had nothing else to do. They didn't have money. They had to they had fighting, but they had no one to really fight for. So well over some of them they lent their strength. So anyway, these ceramic jars and all of these supplies that they had, a lot of them were imported from Greeks. So it makes sense that they would find all this pottery even though it wasn't in Greece itself. The Phoenicians on the Palestine coast and their fleet had been subjugated by the Assyrians and then by the Persians, so that's why the Phoenician pottery is there as well. And not much is known about the Phoenicians. Some people think that they're related to the Philistines, and if you guys don't know who the Philistines are in the Bible, if you're familiar with David and Goliath was like the champion of the Philistines. He was a giant. He was a legitimate giant. And the Philistines ended up, it gets kind of fuzzy. They either ended up becoming the Canaanites or the Canaanites absorbed them into their population eventually in the aftermath. But either way, people think the modern day Palestinians come from the ancient Philistines. Hence, the similarity in their name linguistically. I don't know either way. I've heard a bunch of different stories and a bunch of different arguments for either side. All I know is that during this time that the Philistines really did exist, the Phoenicians existed. Not much is known about them. So the ancient Greek historian Herodotus said that the Greek mercenaries fought in the Persian Emperor Cambyses' army, which is around this time, 520 BC. The Greek and Phoenician ceramic finds in the Persian layer of Tel Kassan suggest that this area was part of the base camp of the great Achaemenid Empire. Oh yeah, there's something else I didn't mention about this Tel Kassan site. When they do excavations, they usually do it in layers. So in my previous video, I talked about the subterranean pyramid in Java. And that's very similar as well. They did a core. They took a core sample, and the deeper you went, the older it was. So the same thing is going on here. So very recently, in 2016 and 2018, Lehman and David Schloen from the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago, they did one excavation in 2016 and one this past year in 2018, and they exposed levels dating to the Hellenistic period, which is 3rd and 2nd century BC. That's the time of Alexander. The Persian period, which is what we're talking about now, the 5th and 4th centuries BC, and then this era called the Iron Age 2C, which is the 7th century BC. And they also found layers even lower, dating to the late Iron Age, around 3,000 years ago. So that makes it about 1,000 BC. And then, however, they haven't thoroughly explored them. Now, I mentioned earlier, if you go to that if you type in Find a Dig and you go to that website, they're planning on doing that this summer. So, hey, you guys can definitely be on the cutting edge here. If you want to be among the first to explore that in thousands and thousands of years, probably. The site itself, Tel Kassan, goes back 6,000 years at the very least. Like, they have evidence for occupation way back 6,000 years. So perhaps the Phoenicians or the precursor to the Phoenicians or some other society or culture was definitely living there. And another interesting thing about Tel Kesan is the actual name. So in Arabic, Tel Kesan means hill of treachery. And they don't know why they called it that. So from the 12th century onward, by Arabic historians, that's what they were calling it. And they think it might refer to an embarrassing military event. I don't know, maybe a group of veteran soldiers got murdered there or got surprised, or maybe there was a huge mass murder there of civilians. Who knows? But they don't know what the actual settlement's name was in antiquity. So the name now is Tel Kesan. Who knows what it was back then? The only other name they know it by was by the time the Ptolemies got there. They call it Ptolemaeus. But I don't know what the name was. There's no record of it. So like I said, Kesan sits on a hill 28 meters above sea level. Above the ground, rather. In the heart of the Acre Plain. So this is what it looks like. It's only about 15 acres or something like that. It's not that big. Again, it's strategically positioned. It overlooks the fertile plain of Jezreel, and it was it was along the commercial trade routes between Galilee, the Jordan Valley, and further east into Jordan, or what's now Jordan. They know that there were fortifications at 1000 BC at the very least. So there were massive systems of fortifications, actually. So there was probably a giant fortress here at 3,000 years plus ago. So you guys can, with that information, you guys can use your imagination. If there was a culture who had the wherewithal to build a giant fortification that still survives to this day after all the armies that had passed through since 1000 BC, then there was probably some serious civilization that was established there back then to have occupied the site. So this is probably a very, very prominent site that is just probably hiding stuff underground, which again, all the more reason for you guys to sign up and volunteer your time over there. So based on the discoveries in the archaeological layers, it seems that the serial conquerors of Palestine, by the way, serial conquerors, that's a great name for a heavy metal band. The serial conquerors of Palestine found the settlement's strategic location irresistible. The locals, Egyptians, Persians under Cambyses II, they all have used it as an administrative center and military base of operations in the 5th century BC and later as well. So yeah, that would make sense. If you have a huge army like the Persians do, and according to the numbers provided by Herodotus and some of the ancient historians, and I know some of these numbers can be inflated, but still there is a kernel of truth there. Over 200,000 soldiers easily were moving from this area all the way down to Egypt. So this could be one of many staging areas. As far as moving, why would they have a giant army and move them through cities? Well, back then, if you had military might, if you were a general, it was in your best interest that everybody knew you had a giant army. Even if word of mouth would spread, you want the enemy to know you have a giant army, because it puts the pressure on them, and B, it makes them shake up their strategy a little bit. And as a general, you want to, especially back then, you wanted to command that fear. And this has been written about by Sun Tzu in The Art of War. What do you call the Romans did this. So when the Romans led the campaign into the Middle East, they deliberately would kick up dust using brooms, sticks, their weapons, whatever. So from a distance, it looked like there was a huge army. So it was in their best interest to get people to think that there was a huge amount of soldiers coming through. So that's part of the reason why the Persians they like to move slowly. And again, if you're passing through the streets, word of mouth gets out. Oh, did you see Cambyses? Whoa, he had a giant army. 200,000, bro. Well, that's probably not how they were talking, but you know what I mean. The word of mouth, word spread quickly in those times. So regarding the Egyptians, Kesan was one of several strongholds along the Acre coastal plain when they controlled Palestine. And from around 637 to 605 BC, The other two were Achziv and Tel Kabri, and there probably were more. And yeah, he's right. If there are only 3 staging areas for a giant, let's look at the map. So if this was one staging area and there's only 3 more, look how far. Egypt is down here, way south of Judah, down here. There would probably be more than 3 of these staging areas if you're marching a giant army down. So there are probably more that they haven't discovered, and it wouldn't surprise me if they discovered more in the near future. Yeah, here's another view here. So they marched from roughly where my cursor is here all the way down to Egypt. At Kaysan itself, right below the Persian level, the archaeologists exposed a large building with storage rooms dating to the earlier Egyptian empire of the 26th dynasty. So, I mentioned earlier all the levels to this excavation. Well, even at the bottom part, below the Persian level, there's evidence that the Egyptians were there. And they were using mercenaries back then as well. And it makes sense. The Egyptians weren't known for their military. They typically outsource that stuff. They would get mercenaries from the surrounding area, and even Greek mercenaries and Phoenician mercenaries, I think. I did I did a video back in October about the Hyksos. So there is this, very quickly, there was this foreign group of people called the Hyksos. Those weren't, who knows what they went by back then. They somehow usurped the dynasty for like a period of 80 years or something. Since then, the Egyptians started developing their own military, but it still wasn't strong. It wasn't like the Persian military at all. So the building that they found underneath the Persian level that belonged to the Egyptian Empire, it dates to 7th century BC. And it also served as a governmental or administrative building. Again, it provided food for its personnel, all kinds of supplies. The building also contained Phoenician, Cypriot, and East Greek pottery, but of an earlier type typical of pre-Persian time. So again, all these guys were probably mercenaries or something. They found a lot of complete storage jars, mostly of Phoenician origin, and Cypriot basket handle amphoras, typically of the 7th century BCE. By the way, if you guys happen to find a Phoenician jar, hang on to that, because that's probably worth a ridiculous amount of money, because we don't know anything about the Phoenicians. We can't even read their script. And the Minoans, the ancient Minoans, they had a script themselves that we can't decipher, and scientists have suggested that the Phoenician script and the Minoan script are very similar. So they probably had some sort of culture predating everything that we're talking about now. So it's very interesting that the Phoenician pottery is found here, and they might have been among the first cultures to have widespread pottery manufacturing, because it seems like the Phoenician pottery is everywhere. That might have been why they lasted so long. It's because of that was a good that they traded. That's very possible. Among the people using the facility may have been mercenaries serving under Egyptian command. Yeah, Egypt. The strength of Egypt wasn't their military. It was their culture and their ideas and their religion, and that may be part of the reason why Cambyses was very quick to want to invade them, because he didn't want to chance them gaining power and usurping the empire, or becoming a threat to the empire. And they were a threat. Everybody recognized Egypt as a threat. It's Egypt, man. It's they were always in the mix for domination. So let's get into the accounts, the historical accounts. So Cambyses II's campaign to conquer Egypt, assembling forces to cross the waterless deserts in 525 BC, was described by Herodotus. Cambyses thrashed the pharaoh Psamtik III at Memphis and won Egypt and the sea. And the reason why he won Egypt and the sea is because, if you look at the map here, he owned all of the Eastern Mediterranean here. He had Asia Minor, he had parts of Greece. Well, he didn't have, not yet anyway, this is Darius later on, but still, he had basically all sides of all the coastlines of Eastern Mediterranean. So yeah, he won the sea, essentially. And then there are 2 other ancient sources, aside from Herodotus, that locate the Persian force in in the Acre Plain in this in Tel Kaysan. So the other one is Diodorus Siculus. He talks about the preparations made by the Persian monarch. The Persian army gathered at the city of Akka, which is this Tel Kaysan. Akka, Akko, Acre, they're all the same. They all refer to the same area. Numbering 200,000 barbarians led by Pharnabazes. I don't know who that is. That might be one of the Persian kings or something. And 20,000 Greek mercenaries under the command of Iphicrates. Of the fleet, the triremes number 300, and there are 30 oared ships. 230. What? Hold on. The triremes number 300, and the 30 oared ships 200. Okay, so there were ships with 30 oars, and there are 200 of those. That's a lot of military personnel. And great was the number of those carrying food and other supplies. So again, a giant army. They want to make sure people see them. And imagine if you're Greece. I mean, if you're Egypt, you're probably shitting your pants. You don't have, like, even if you have the mercenaries. The thing about mercenaries is, once it becomes clear who's going to win, a lot of them are just going to leave and to fight another day for someone else for more money. So yeah, they were screwed for sure. The second source is a Greek geographer and philosopher Strabo. I'm sure you guys have heard of him. Then follows Ptolemais, the city of Acre, formerly called Assa. It was a place for rendezvous for the Persians in their expedition against Egypt. So there you go. 3 ancient sources that all say that the Persians were there with the giant army. It seems that Kaysan was just one of several points in Palestine we were talking about. There's probably more. Tel al-Fukar, Tel Kaysan, Tel Qardana, Tel Afek, Tel Abu Khalam, which is now Haifa. And Barry Strauss, this professor, he even says nimbleness was not the trademark of the Achaemenid way of war. Big and slow was how they liked their military, both to overwhelm the enemy and impress their own subjects. A massive expeditionary force needed a big base of operations, which is again why I think there are more than 3 staging areas. There's probably 10 or 12, maybe even 15. Again, remember, Alexander came in less than 200 years after what I'm describing now, what the Persians did. So Alexander may have destroyed a bunch of their fortifications. Remember, Alexander was a man on a mission. He just wanted to expand his empire. He even left some Persian satraps in charge as governors just because he just wanted to hurry up and finish the military campaign. So that's why you see a lot of the architecture was still, the Persian architecture and their infrastructure was still in place. He just made sure they knew who was really in charge. And everything else he just destroyed. It's not like the Mongols, where the Mongols were just they come into your territory and be like, "Are you with us? If you're with us, you got to come fight on the front lines. If you're not with us, we're gonna kill you right here and now, you and your family, everybody." Which is it? So that the Mongols made it very clear. Alexander was kind of gave him a little hope, like, "Hey, we're trying to run a military campaign. You can run this. You can be governor of this place. If you screw me over, then yeah, you're dead. But here's some money, and just run this region for me while I go out." Who knows what he would have done with them later? But remember, he's expanded his empire in a very short amount of time. He was like 20 something years old, and then he died when he was like 31 or 32 or something like that. So he really was trying to get to India, which he did. One reason is because the various empires. Oh, sorry, I skipped a part. So why were the Persians so adamant about conquering Egypt? I mentioned earlier. Various empires in the Levant and Middle East considered Egypt to be a major threat. They didn't. First of all, they didn't want Egypt controlling a place like Palestine that had fertile land, a long coast, trade routes, and a convenient area to attack not just Egypt but everything else neighboring that area. And also, here's the other part: to contain Egypt's influence over the Levant. Remember, Egypt is coming off of a long dynasty of like thousands and thousands of years of being a kingdom, and they were commanding so much cultural influence, that so much so that the Persian Empire thought they were a huge threat. So he just wanted to nip that issue in the bud. So I forgot who said it. I think it was Graham Hancock who said it. When the Greeks came to take over Egypt the first time, I'm not talking about the Romans. When the Romans came, it was over for them. But before that, when the Greeks came, the Greeks took their borders. Sure, they took control of their borders, but it was the Egyptians who conquered the Greek mind. Essentially, the Greeks became Egyptians, and they held those Egyptian values, which is why you see a lot of cross between their gods and all that stuff. But when the Romans came, that was it. They set fire to the place and killed whoever wasn't on board. The forces of Cambyses massed on the coast would have needed a huge apparatus and an incredible amount of resources. Tel Keisan would have provided all that, among other places like Tel Keisan. Archaeologists found remnants of storage jars and cooking pots in large quantities that may have been used by Cambyses' armies. They found a large pit with organic debris and substantial quantities of pottery. And then later on, Alexander came in, and after that, Ptolemaic Egypt and Seleucid Syria, among others, they rose from. So when Alexander died, all of his generals immediately split up the land, and then they all warred with each other. And then the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, they rose to power, and then they started squabbling over Palestine as well. And then after that, it was just one after another. The Greeks, the Persians, and then the Ottoman Empire, and it wasn't good for that area. That entire area was just constantly in struggle. The Byzantines came in, the Romans, of course. So yeah, this site, Tel Keisan, is very interesting. The settlement was abandoned after the Hellenistic period. And then the Romans came in, and they didn't really use it. They occupied it, and then they deserted it. And then the Byzantines came in, and they created a church, and it was which still is, the remnants of are still there, and they were well preserved enough to be excavated by the French expedition a few years later. And then the 8th century, right after the Byzantine Empire fell, or a few hundred years after that, it was abandoned again, then resettled in the medieval time, and then the Ottoman, all the way up until the Ottoman period, which then they abandoned, and that was that. So, yeah, like I said earlier, I covered this in the live stream. Let me know what you guys think about this article and Alexander, or the Persian Empire under Cambyses. So yeah, looking at this map, you can see that Cambyses, this was his main contribution here, was subjugating Egypt. And that, again, that must have taken a lot of foresight, because he knew at some point the Egyptians were going to come after him. They were just too powerful, and if you're coming from Cambyses' point of view, yeah, you've got to nip it in the bud quick. The thing with the Persians, though, a few hundred years later, they just got destroyed by Alexander, and they were just kind of keeping the seat warm, right, for him. Because if you look at this map, and then you look at Alexander's conquest, all of this is within Alexander's conquest, and then some. So, yeah, let me know what you guys think. I wish I still could leave the live stream up. It was so good. I'm gonna have another video tomorrow of the other article that I did also in the live stream. It's about Freemasonry, American Freemasonry. Is very interesting. I don't typically do those type of videos, but it's such an interesting story. I'd have to share it with you guys. And I hope this was informative of you guys, for you guys rather. I hope you learned something. I learned a lot here. Who knows how many of these sites exist? Like I said, in every video I do about this region, there's always something new that comes out. I'm not shitting you. Every day something comes out. So please let me know what you guys think. I'm not joking about volunteering either. You guys can definitely do it. You guys just have to email the head director, the head excavator, and you guys can work something out. And if you have money, it shouldn't be that big of a deal, and time, obviously. So let me know what you guys think in the comments, and I'll see you guys later.